Ladies and gents, my name is Matt Locke and you're listening to, and perhaps watching, the Unleashing Potential podcast. It's in these episodes that I chat with a range of progressive individuals who are unleashing their potential on the world around them at work and in life. With that said, I'm glad you're here so you can join me as we take a deep dive with today's guest. Hi there, Ben. It's welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Matt, thanks for having me. Always happy to talk about movement and talk with somebody who I think is a kindred spirit.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When we first chatted a few weeks ago, it became obvious we chatted for way longer than normal, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'm really looking forward to you sharing your pearls of wisdom and expertise over this conversation. But before we jump into all of that, tell us a little bit about who you are, Ben, where you are, and what you do.
Well, I am about 20 miles south of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the United States. My real job is I'm an associate professor at California University of Pennsylvania. I dabble in personal training, I dabble in podcasting, and I like to say, if you look at my Twitter handle, I kind of straddle the line between academic and practitioner. But above all, what I think I've found my message is to remind people or teach people or encourage people to look at movement as a lifestyle and not just an activity or a workout that you have to complete.
Absolutely. And in fact, you're, amongst everything else, you're also the host of the Move to Live podcast, correct?
Yes, Moving to Live, and also one local here in the Pittsburgh area, Fit Lab Pittsburgh or Fitness Lab Pittsburgh.
Fantastic. Let's maybe let's start on the Moving to Live podcast, because obviously it's interesting, as I well know, and you do it. It's an investment of time and energy to run a podcast. I mean, for sure, it's a wonderful excuse to network with some amazing people as well and talk about all things that we enjoy. But what's the history of Moving to Live podcast, the motivation behind it?
I think I'm probably one of the few people around who remembers when iTunes first came around and you could actually download podcasts for free. And the first podcast I ever learned about was Dirtbag Diaries, which were people telling stories about doing things in the outdoors. And this was probably 2005, 2006. And I remember thinking, I could hear these stories from people literally all over the world, and it was free. And to me, the amazing thing was that it was free because, I was a young professional, and the idea of actually paying for content other than cable TV just never occurred to me. Fast forward a few years, as I mentioned, I'm an exercise physiologist by training. And by the way, for your guests who are listening, if you notice that I'm moving around during the interview, I'm actually at a standing desk on a wobble board. So the wobble board is moving around. It's not that I'm extremely nervous to be talking to Matt.
Well, you've one up me. I'm at a stand-up desk as well, but I don't have a wobble board.
Well, that'll get it. That actually plays in very well with the story about how Moving to Live started. As I listen to more and more podcasts, and for lack of a better term, what we're all in, whether it's you, whether it's me, whether it's physical therapists who have podcasts, whether it's physicians who have podcasts, we're in the movement field. At the end of the day, most of us, unless we're dealing with surgeries or things like that, we want our patients, clients, or athletes to either move more or move better. And but better may be more efficiently if they're an athlete. Better may be if you're working with somebody who is injured or somebody who has a chronic disease where they're in a wheelchair or something that makes it easier for them to move. So that's the field we're in. And as I listen to people across the field in podcasts, say around 2015, 2016, I came to a couple of realizations. The first realization was there were a lot of people out there doing podcasts who only talked to people who thought like they did. So the strength coaches would talk to the strength coaches, the physical therapists would talk to the physical therapists, and so on and so forth. So we have these layers, and I think anybody who's in this field would agree with this. We have these layers of silo knowledge where you and you talk to people and you gain knowledge. You have these people that you look for, or these websites or these journals that you read, never recognizing that somebody in another movement related field may be saying something or doing something. It's like, wow, that's really interesting, or that's something that can help me with the people that I work with. So I was out with my dogs. One of them was a chocolate Labrador who unfortunately has since passed, and that's where the standing desk comes in with the wobble board. This is actually a wobble board on orbs. It's called a Pona Orna board. It's on little air balls. And the reason I had to get that is my late dog would like to sit at my feet when I did podcasting and work at the standing desk. And I was worried with a standard wobble board that I would pinch her nose. So the neat thing about this is I actually have a picture of her that my girlfriend took while I was doing a podcast, where she's sitting with her nose resting on my toes that are on this wobble board. But to get back to why the podcast or how it started is I was listening to a podcast, and somebody who's very well respected in the biomechanics field said, some of the people doing the best things in the world or the best things in our field, you never hear about because they worry about that and not their social media. And I realized, I'd like to find some of these people, and I'm just innately curious. I always like to talk to people who know something that I don't know. And so I went out and I bought all this podcasting equipment. And I've told this story before. It sat on my kitchen table and I was like, crap, I don't know how to use this. So I am not a Pittsburgh native. I have lived in Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh area, for almost 20 years. And I believe when we chatted last, you said in a former career, you spent some time in Pittsburgh. So you can appreciate this, although maybe some of your listeners don't. Pittsburgh is two things. First of all, it's a city of neighborhoods. So there are, I'm going to get this wrong, somewhere over 90 different neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. And the second thing is Pittsburgh has, because of its topography, it's a city of rivers and tunnels that take you through hills or underneath rivers. The joke in Pittsburgh is people don't like to go across bridges or through tunnels. So there could be something fairly close to you, and you'll appreciate this having lived in a variety of places in the world. I live 18 miles from the center of the Liberty Bridge in Pittsburgh. And if I told that to somebody who lived in downtown Pittsburgh, they'd say, wow, you live out in the boondocks. Whereas if you told somebody in Atlanta, Georgia, or Charlotte, or some other place, I'm 18 miles from downtown, they said, oh, it's a nice, easy trip in. But it isn't easy to get around in Pittsburgh because of the topography. There's difficulty going straight lines. You may have to go someplace, but you may have to go around a mountain or find the right bridge to go through. So my podcast idea that I originally had, that, boy, I want to interview these people and break down these knowledge silos, moving to live, before I started cold calling people literally across the world, I needed to learn how to use this equipment. And Pittsburgh, as well as being a neighborhood city, is a city that 45, 50 years ago was a working class city, steel mills, coal mines in the surrounding area. And movement is not something that everybody does or takes for granted. It's not like if you go to Denver, Colorado, and every house has 2.5 bicycles for every person. And I'm kind of exaggerating there. But I realized there were all kinds of people and businesses and activities in Pittsburgh that emphasized movement, whether it was somebody who did kayaking, whether it was somebody who taught Tai Chi, whether it was somebody who organized an event that promoted movement. So my girlfriend and I, who do this, started going around and interviewing people in the Pittsburgh area, literally just cold calling them and saying, hey, we got this podcast, I'd like to talk to you. And you get three groups of people. And you probably find this in your podcasting career. One of the groups of people is kind of like you and me. Absolutely, love to talk to you. I'm sure I'm going to have you on my podcast, Moving to Live, hopefully in a few weeks. And it's kind of like, we're just going to talk because you are excited about what you talk about and you want to talk to other people and share what you do. That's one group. Another group is kind of like, I don't know why you want to talk to me. I'm just like, this is just not something I'm not comfortable. And one of the things you have to admit, it's really easy to type something out on social media, on Facebook or Instagram, but it's a lot more intimate to have a face-to-face, even though we're thousands of miles away, where pretty much everybody's listening to what I say, the foibles, the fumbles, etc. And I understand some people are not comfortable with that. And then there's the final group of people that thankfully have been the minority. They just never respond. You contact them, and whether it's they don't want to respond, or there's so many different ways to get in touch with people. You and I probably each have 5 or 6 different social media profiles. So I started doing these Fit Lab Pittsburgh or Fitness Lab Pittsburgh things, thinking it would go away, interviews, thinking it would go away. Now we're well over 200 interviews. And then I started doing Moving to Live because I had the knowledge, and I thought Fit Lab Pittsburgh would go away, but I have a series of interviews that goes 14 or 15 people that kind of leapfrogs, excuse me, back and forth between Fit Lab Pittsburgh and Moving to Live. And you really realize that when you start doing things with podcasting, it really is global. So Fit Lab Pittsburgh is still here. Moving to Live, which has always been virtual, like the conversations you and I have, is still here. Moving to Live has been more about interviewing professionals to find out how they got to where they are. And I know you've got an interesting story that hopefully you'll tell in a few weeks. And we've also had the opportunity to interview, just because people have suggested them, movers who have an interesting story. A gentleman who's an ultra runner who lost his vision and lost his hearing and still is able to run. And to me, the incredible thing about that is he has a cochlear implant. So we actually did a Zoom call, just like you and I are doing right here. And this is a gentleman who had no vision and no hearing without the cochlear implant. And if you listen to this, it sounds just like you and I are talking.
Wow.
So to kind of sum it up, 2 podcasts, Fitness Lab Pittsburgh, which is kind of more local, Moving to Live, which I can say is international because we've interviewed a few Aussies, a couple Australians, etc. And in addition with Fit Lab Pittsburgh, because I really believe that movement is a lifestyle, 3 times a week, we do 1-minute videos that we post on our various social media channels. And the 1-minute videos are movement tip, lifestyle hacks, really simple things we're actually doing for the month of August. We're doing this interview, and I guess we're in mid-August now. It's hard to believe that. But for month of August, we're doing words. And we're talking about how words relate to movement, motivation, different things like that. Most of these videos take place outdoors when I'm running or biking. And I tell people, if you don't want to be motivated to move, if you don't take movement seriously, watch the videos, because many of them show my Labradors, or if we do the videos at home, my cats basically making fools of themselves. So you can see Labradors or cats doing funny tricks. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell of Moving to Live and Fitness Lab Pittsburgh, the podcast to promote movement as a lifestyle, not just an activity.
Fantastic. And let's face it, as we well know, the internet was actually designed for funny videos with dogs and cats. So appreciate that you're using the internet for what it's really about.
and actually, I have to say this too, and I think you'll appreciate it, and your listeners too. In the Pittsburgh area, there's been twice when I've been out with my dogs and people have run up to me and said, I recognize the Labradors from the Fit Lab Pittsburgh videos. Not that they recognize me. And to me, that's actually more exciting than somebody saying, hey, I love your podcast, because it's showing me they're watching them. And of course, if you have dogs or cats, the dogs are absolutely going crazy because, oh, somebody recognizes me and is paying attention to me. So my dogs, I like to say, are more famous in the Pittsburgh area than I am.
We'll have to work on getting their portograph at some stage. Now, look, I love the background to Moving to Live, and certainly movement as a lifestyle is something that resonates deeply with me, with the whole team at this end, no question about it. I think what would be really interesting, I mean, given that you've interviewed by now so many professionals and interesting people from different parts of the world in the field of movement, it's probably I don't know if it's unfair or not, but if you were to pick out your top 5 takeaways, I mean, what we try and do with this podcast is, I guess, pull out and extract actionable, implementable sort of nuggets of wisdom. And as you say, often it's all bundled up in knowledge silos, and this is a perfect forum for getting it out there and sharing it across different groups, different demographics. So if you were to pick out your top 5 takeaways, and it could be on any subjects, with the commonality being movement related, do you want to give that a go?
Sure. I think the one, and for some of them, I'm going to mention the people who brought it to mind.
Yeah.
And some of them, I won't mention it because I'm horrible with names. So I can think the first one I'm going to say is, people will often say to me, and I'm sure they often say to you, what's the best type of exercise, or what's the best type of activity to do? And this came from a mental health professional who, when we did the interview, every time I would ask a question, it was a phenomenal interview, he would say, it depends, and then explain further what he meant. So it almost got to be a catch line in the interview. It depends. And we'd laugh, and then he'd go on and give more information. So I think the first thing to say is, movement is a lifestyle. And when somebody says, well, how should I move? It depends. What's right for you is not necessarily right for me. I think the one thing that we can take away from it is, movement is important, whatever it is, whether it's walking your dog, whether it's literally fidgeting when you're sitting at the desk, or doing as you and I are, standing at a standing desk. Anything that makes us move is better than staying still. So I think the first one is, it depends on what type of movement. It depends what type of movement is best. I think the second thing is, don't overcomplicate it. There are wonderful gyms out there. There are wonderful fitness classes out there. There are wonderful professionals out there. There are national and international organizations that have done reams and reams of research that talks about this is how you should exercise, this is how much you should exercise, etc. And I think it was when you and I were chatting a few weeks ago before we recorded the interview, I commented that there's something like a third of the adult population in the world does not move on a regular basis. And we're not talking about people who are unable to because of medical issues. Just a third of the people don't move. So I think the second thing, or the second, isn't it? It's a scary statistic.
Yeah.
And it's something, and this will play into my third point, excuse me, coming on. But my second point with that is everybody can benefit from some sort of movement. So pick something that you enjoy doing. You can do the official cardiovascular recommendations. You can do the official strength and resistance training recommendations. But at the end of the day, if you want to move for a lifetime, if you want to have the ability to do what you want to do, your idea of what you want to do, maybe you want to go surfing 5 out of 7 days every week. On the other hand, you may want to say, in 25 years, I want to be able to get down on the floor and play with my grandkids.
And get back up again.
and get back up again. Yes, that's sometimes we forget that that's the extremely difficult part. So I think the second piece is if you're going to move, which I strongly encourage everybody, and I'm sure we'll get into this more, something that you do the majority of the time should be something that you enjoy, because if you don't enjoy doing it, you're less likely to do it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's such a solid piece of advice. And I think I know that people in our circles here, often it becomes a barrier to movement, and it's purely psychological. But they think, they think of movement, they think, oh, I've got to go to the gym, I've got to go do gym classes. And, a lot of people enjoy gym classes. I do. I mean, and that's fine. But that's, as you said, it's only one form of movement. I mean, movement is, even if it's making it a routine of just get up and go for a walk. Even if you don't have a dog, pretend you got a dog, take your virtual dog for a walk for 10 or 20 minutes every morning, get some fresh air, maybe get some sunlight, get some vitamin D, and just move. And I
think that's going to have not only a physical benefit, but that's going to have a psychological benefit. And, it gives you the opportunity to see some incredible things. I mean, one of the things that I've gotten to see that's one of the things I do most days of the week. My dogs go to a local park, and about 2.5 years ago, as I'm pulling into the park, I see 3 deer swimming across the stream, which, I mean, I assumed that deer swam. I didn't know that for sure, but I saw them. And this was in the spring when the water was relatively high. And I watched 2 deer very easily swim across the stream, clamber up on shore. The third deer started getting swept down towards a bridge. And my first thought was, oh no, I'm going to watch this deer drown. I was not crazy enough or stupid enough to think I'm going to jump in the water and save the deer. But as I watched it, the deer just kind of let the current take it until it got to an eddy. The deer crawled up or trotted up on the shore, kind of shook itself and ran off with its friends. And to me, one of the neat things about that is I actually had the impetus or intelligence to pull out my cell phone and record it. So I have this neat little video of that if I hadn't made the decision to get up on a day that was kind of rainy, kind of cloudy, kind of sucky if you like sunny weather, and I have this thing that I can look back and say, wow, that's pretty cool that I got to see that, irregardless of the benefits physically or psychologically that I got from movement. So I think that's picking something that I enjoyed, and I was able to gain a memory that definitely was totally unexpected when I got up that morning, or even when I probably grumbled, I really kind of am not going to enjoy this, but I'm going to do it because I know I'll feel better when I'm done.
Yeah, that's the point. Actually, a couple of things. Certainly on the subject of just walking, I read the other day, actually, it's interesting that a brisk walk, you don't have to run, a brisk walk will release the same range of neurochemicals that give runners their runner's high, the endorphins, the dopamine, and so on. You get that from a brisk walk, actually. And obviously what you don't get from, if you were running, you don't get then that physical stressor, which leads to recovery and all those other things. But actually a brisk walk, there's so much value in it. And speaking to the mental health piece, let alone from a neurochemical release perspective, just grab a mate, Or take a family member or grab a mate. Forget, tricky at the moment because we've gone back down into lockdown because of COVID. But you're allowed one mate, so that's okay. But go for a walk and have that. The mental health benefits of that are untold. The second point, what you've just said, is it reminded me of a quote from a lady called Felicity Lemke, a good friend of ours, who's a two-time gold medalist Olympian, and certainly she gets asked a lot about the subject of motivation, and how did you stay so motivated to train at those levels? And she said, well, even today, she said, I don't bounce out of bed every morning naturally full of joy, looking forward to back in the day going and swimming miles and miles in the pool. She said, but I said it to myself then, and I said to myself now, I've never regretted a workout after I've done it, never. And that's the point, isn't it? To speaking to your point, sometimes it's like, the thought of rolling out of bed on a cold morning and just sometimes it just doesn't appeal, but you do it anyway because you know that you'll feel better for it, and it sets you up for the day, which is perfect.
So I think I've got a couple more kind of pearls or things that I've picked up.
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to contribute or attribute two of these to somebody who is an Irishman living in Australia. He has a podcast related to sleep, and I apologize if I pronounce his last name wrong. Dr. Ian Dunican. He is a sleep researcher. And from my podcast for him, I don't remember if this was actually in our conversation before or after, because I'm sure, as you found, often the pearls come out when you're chatting before or after recording. But he said two things. He said, first of all, and I kind of primed the pump with this one, as Americans, we have a tendency to have huge portions of food. So I think rather than, and this is not getting into doing nutritional advice or anything like that, but each one of us has to really look at the food that we eat and say, how much do we eat and what do we eat? Like, what are our triggers for eating things? So realize that what we put in our mouths is our choice. So we choose whether we're going to have the large French fries or the medium French fries. And to me, one of the things that was the biggest educator for me on this of just being aware of what you put in your mouth, not dieting, not saying dieting or this is good food or this is bad food. Just be conscious of what you put in your mouth. And I think you can't do it now because you're closed down, but next time, think about it when you go out to a Mexican food restaurant. The first thing many of these restaurants do is they bring you a big bowl of chips. So you're there, you're talking to your mates, you're chatting, and before you know it, you've gone through 3 or 4 bowls of chips and you haven't even ordered the main dish. So that's kind of just mindless doing something. Now, if you have had a good workout or you decide, this is the day that I really am going to hang out with my friends and I'm going to enjoy myself and not worry about what I'm going to eat, then by all means enjoy yourself, but just be mindful of what it is. I mean, I know for me that if I don't set out the stuff the night before, I'm not going to eat good things that are good for me for breakfast. This is something I've learned over 53 years. And I've learned that if I don't eat a good breakfast, it's not good for me. So I think the third message is just be aware of what you eat and why. And maybe in some instances, to get a good idea, you have to talk to a professional, in the United States, a registered dietitian or somebody who does that, just to talk it through. Not saying there's good foods, bad foods, give me a program, just be aware. So that's number one from Dr. Dunican. Number two is make an appointment with yourself or be consciously aware that movement is part of your life. So he said something that really struck with me. And when I looked back at my practices, he said, it is almost an unwritten rule with me that as many days as possible of the week, I do at least an hour a day of movement. Now, this may be excessive for some people, so we don't want this to come out and say, you have to do an hour of movement. He said, I don't do that for physical means. He said, I do that for mental means, for my productivity, for my outlook on life. And as I thought about it, and I went back a bit and looked at it, for me, the sweet spot seems to be if I can do some sort of movement. And Dr. Dunican said, sometimes that is a walk, sometimes that's calisthenics in his room. But if I can do, for me, somewhere around 40 to 45 minutes, most days of the week, and for me, that's at a minimum, my mental outlook is so much better. And my quality of life is so much better. And to kind of build on that, when I went back to school, I was a traditional doctoral student. I was 27 or 28. I'd worked for a couple of years. And I found out after the fact that my mentor, a gentleman who really has been helpful throughout my career and still is, told my doctoral advisor, hey, if Ben's a real jerk to deal with, send him out for a run or a bike ride, because if he's a jerk, he probably hasn't got enough movement in that day. So find what that sweet spot is for you. And for some people starting out, it may be just a 10-minute walk, and do your best most days of the week. I mean, I know there have been times when I've been traveling and that 40 or 45 minutes has been between flights, walking up and down the airplane concourse, which maybe isn't my first choice, but it's a lot better than sitting in an airport restaurant eating bad food, or sitting at the gate going like this on my phone.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what, it can be depending on the height of the building, but take the stairs, not the lift. That kind of thing. Just make that choice. Just where there's an opportunity to move rather than not. I mean, I certainly take that. Not that lifts don't feature a lot in my world anymore since I left the corporate space, but that's okay. I don't mind. I don't miss them. But no, it's great advice. I mean, I think we can all ultimately create opportunities for movement more than we do. Like you and I, we're standing at our desk now. We've chosen to have a stand-up desk. And I know that I actually stand at mine, I would say 95% of the time. I mean, I've got a chair underneath it. I can drop it down if I need to, but I tend not to, because otherwise, what's the point of having a stand-up desk?
Yeah, my anticipation was I was going to do it about 50-50. And I'm like you, I'm 95%. Then I would go to a laptop for the other 5 or 10%. And I found that when I get uncomfortable standing, if I look at my watch, I realize that I've probably spent too much time standing and I need to take a break for 5 or 10 minutes to do something else, whether it's go get an espresso, pet the dogs, go for a walk, around the house or something. But, we have a tendency, if we sit at a desk, or at least I did, to just hunch over the desk with bad posture and not concentrate. Before you know it, significant amount of time. There's a famous, relatively famous in the United States, physical therapist. I believe she's still giving seminars, Dr. Shirley Sarman. And she has a comment, I believe it's in a number of her books, and I've heard her say it before. It's like, don't stay in one position for more than 20 minutes.
Right.
So if you're standing at your desk, and obviously when we're flying, if I was to fly from the United States to Australia to visit you, I may not be able to do that, but I'm the person when the seatbelt light goes off, I'm walking up and down the aisle. But try to move around frequently. I think that's probably my fifth point, and I'll have one more for you after that. So my fifth point would be, try to move frequently. If you're not an exerciser, and not everybody's an exerciser, not everybody's going to be like you and me, where we enjoy doing this, it's part of our life. But everybody can make a conscious choice to be a mover. So as you said, not taking the lift, parking a little farther away in the car park. So I guess that would be my fifth, is micro movement times throughout the day. So rather than saying, oh God, I've got to do a 20-minute walk or a 30-minute walk, just say, where are the places in my life where I can add movement without it being, oh God, I've got to move. And I think micro movements or small periods of time when you can do that are a great way to add it in. I interviewed a physician who's got a kettlebell and he's got a pull-up bar, and he may have a TRX also in his office. And when he's between patients or a patient cancels, he goes back in his office and he does a little mini workout. So I think that's the thing when people say, I don't have time, it's like, start with small things and that will add more movement to your life.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually, one thing I've enjoyed recently, sort of the last month or so, and we're going to continue doing it. There's a local company called IT Basecamp here who certainly handle all of our digital stuff. And they're great. They have a boot camp twice a week. But what we've got into the habit now is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they asked me, would you do just a sort of a core session for us at lunchtime, core session, mostly body weight. And it's something I enjoy anyway. So it's like, yeah, sure, we can do that. And they stream it via their sort of Teams app and so on, and they get a whole bunch of their staff involved. And actually, I've really started appreciating that. I'm normally the guy that gets up super early and will train early in the morning, and then I'll train again at night. So I tend to train twice a day. It's a hangover from my sort of ultra distance triathlon days. But I enjoyed it. It's a routine. It's certainly good for my head as it is for my body. But actually, I'm really enjoying these sort of 20, 25 minutes. That's all they are at lunchtime. And as I say, it's all mostly body weight because we have to cater for people who are at home or wherever they are. And so occasionally there's some Russian twists or something with a kettlebell. But I can't tell you the difference it makes to my afternoon just for getting away from all things work, breaking the concentration and focusing on something else, and moving. And sure, a light sweat, and they're not heavy sessions, let's say. It's maybe a light sweat, but I just feel great afterwards, and everyone else is saying the same. So for those who are going to move, train, let's say, work out or whatever it is once a day, I have to say, I mean, other than the advantage of starting your day with getting outside and getting some vitamin D and sunlight and all of those things, if you can, where you are, lunchtimes are great for just, I guess it's like a shot in the arm, really, a natural shot in the arm, where it just puts a spring back in your step, physically and mentally, and gets you ready for the second half of the day, of the working day at least. So that's something I've really started enjoying and appreciating. So it's not something I've really done before, training at lunchtime. So there you go. It's something we're enjoying at this end.
You kind of allowed me, or are going to allow me, to add on to my final point, or my final kind of take home message, or thing that I've learned
this is your number 7 of your top 5.
Yes.
And keep going, more the merrier. Give me the top 50.
I would say, and actually I'll use what you just described kind of as an explanation of that. Everybody's different. So what I mean by that is everybody needs to move, but what's right for you is not necessarily right for me, and what your husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, best friend enjoys may or may not be what you do. And I'll give the perfect example. I've done yoga before. I don't like yoga. So I don't do yoga. That does not mean that I think yoga is bad. I think yoga is phenomenal if you have a good instructor and you have somebody who enjoys doing it. And I know there are people who are doing it, but as a corollary of that, I would say, don't be afraid to try something. Don't just say, I don't like it, or I can't do that. Try something. And then after you've tried it, if you realize, boy, I don't like that type of movement or that type of activity, or even, I mean, we could even go back to when you were a kid and your mom or dad said, try this vegetable, and if you don't like it, you don't have to eat it. You may have found that you actually loved broccoli. But to me, a great example of that is when I first started dating my girlfriend. She didn't ride a bike. She knew how to ride a bike. She didn't enjoy it. She started a little bit, and now she has 3 bicycles and is probably looking at maybe getting her 4th. And she never mountain biked, and now she mountain bikes. So I would say everybody's different. Pick things that you enjoy, do them the majority of the time. Don't do things you don't enjoy, but try something new once in a while. And you may find what you try new is something that you actually enjoy. So I've probably given you 8 or 9 things rather than the 5. So maybe I'm an overachiever, or maybe I don't follow directions very well.
Well, certainly, as I say, it can be top 50. I don't mind, because I think you're dropping knowledge bombs all over the place, which is fantastic. On the subject of your girlfriend's bikes, it's the classic game of N+1, isn't it? There's exactly. No such thing as too many bikes. It's not possible.
and back when I was getting my doctorate degree, I'll have to confess, I was kind of I had 15 bicycles at one point in time in a 2-bedroom apartment. Fortunately, I'm down to 5 bicycles, and I can honestly say, I ride all of them at least within a 2-week period. And B, I'd have to think really, really hard before I could come up with another bicycle that I wanted. Subject to change, so don't hold me to that.
That's right. Yeah, damn it, we're recording this. You said it. We've got a little bit of time left, actually, and I'd love to look. When we talked last time, we touched some other subjects, which I'd love to come back to, because you used the term energy vampires last time, and talked about avoiding energy vampires. And I'd love you to just dive into that a little bit, because I think it's such a valuable observation.
I'm going to attribute that actual phrase to Dr. Dunican again, and I don't think that's on the podcast with him, but with our talking. And I think all of us would agree. One of the things that all of us have to recognize, and I think this is where you can get into the great thing about social media, is there's a lot of information out there. The bad thing about social media is there's a lot of information out there. And unless you have a very strong filter to filter the good stuff versus the bad stuff, you can get really messed up psychologically and physically. So energy vampire, think about it this way. All of us have stress in our life. No matter what kind of life we have, you could have what you term as your absolutely perfect life, and you're still going to have stress. Some of that stress is good stress, or people who remember the basic psychology classes, or eustress. Some of it is bad stress or distress. So if we just accept A, that we all have stress, B, some of it is good, some of it is bad, then what we have to do is not about necessarily eliminating stress, but controlling how we deal with it. So there are some people that no matter what, they have a negative effect on us. We leave, we feel angry, we know we have a meeting with them, our shoulders go up, our palms get clenched, we reach for the nearest comfort food or comfort drink. And in some instances, we can't avoid that. I've had bosses in past jobs that, literally, if I saw them now, I would walk across the street and around the corner to avoid even seeing them. I'm sure we all know people like that. At that time, I couldn't avoid dealing with them day to day because I needed the job, but I was searching on the backside and off hours to change my employment. Everybody has energy vampires. And I think the important thing that we need to recognize for quality of life is figure out those people that you have to deal with and those people that you can, for lack of a better term, not deal with. If there's somebody that just absolutely leaves you feeling badly all of the time and you can remove them from your life, then remove them from your life. And it sounds simple, but we all have those people, or we all have those jobs or those situations. Well, I have to do it. Well, I have to do this or that. And yes, sometimes the difficulty is we have this job or we have the situation where it's a temporary or a transient thing, but we know eventually we're going to be able to go through that and get rid of that. So I think what I found as I've gotten older in life and had an epileptic dog, which caused a significant change in my life for 4 years, and had some serious eye problems, is I've become much more cognizant of people that I want to deal with, that I have a choice to deal with, and people that I don't. And I think since I've done that, I've become a happier person, but more importantly, the things that I've been able to do and the pearls, as you said, that I've had have become much more positive because I'm not dreading. Like I was nervous to come and talk to you because I'm always nervous to come on a podcast because you're talking publicly. But it wasn't like, oh crap, I got to talk to Matt. He's going to make me feel like crap. I feel I get off the podcast by talking to somebody like you or the guests that I pick because I'm energized. We're talking, we're exchanging energy, even though it's over the internet, we're exchanging ideas. We're not having somebody who's taking. And to drop the name of another person who I've interviewed, because literally for me, my podcasts are not about me. It's about getting the message out or making people aware. One of the first people I interviewed is a professional colleague. I serve on a couple of committees with him for one of my professional organizations. His name is Rick Howard. He's over in the eastern half of Pennsylvania. And one of the first times I interviewed Rick or talked to Rick, he said, I never want to be that person when somebody calls and wants to talk to me that I don't have time for them. So when I say eliminate the energy vampires, it doesn't mean don't talk to people. Somebody calls me up or somebody contacts me, they want to talk to me, I'm going to talk to them. I'm going to give them information. To me, it's one of the great things where I am now is because people took a chance on me. People gave me the opportunity. But doing that to people is not the same as letting them take advantage of you. So if you said it another time, just as an example, hey, Ben, I'd like to pick your brain about what you're doing with this or that. Absolutely, no problem. But if all of a sudden I found that you and I were having to have, or I was getting emails from you, and this is slightly facetious, I'm not accusing you of this at all. But if I was
I'm taking notes here, Ben.
Yes, here's what I don't do to put them up. But if all of a sudden that I was finding is I was getting long emails from you 5 or 6 times a week with questions and asking me to do things, and it was all a take, that would tell me you're an energy vampire, and this is something that's not giving me the advantage. On the other hand, if I found that we were in a communication 5 or 6 times a week where we were exchanging ideas back and forth, that's not an energy vampire situation. And sometimes it's a matter of talking it over. We all have 2 or 3 trusted people. I mean, I've got a couple of good friends. I've got one good friend. It's absolutely not unusual for him to call me and say, we're not having this conversation, but, and then he basically asks questions or talks to me. Bouncing it off somebody who doesn't have an emotional attachment to it is going to help you identify those people or those individuals or those situations, because it may be an involvement with an organization or a club or something that has that negative stress effect. And I suspect step one is recognizing it. Step two is recognizing, is this something I can get out of right now, or can I make a plan to get out of it, or do I have to stay in it? And step three is actually extracting yourself from that situation. And then the long term or the big term, which we all struggle with, and sometimes we get caught up with it, but the best thing is avoiding getting in those situations. And I think the only thing that can help you avoid getting into those situations is a little bit of luck, and B, a bit of experience where you've been in those situations and kind of something else happens and you get that red flag. If the red flag's going up and it keeps waving, your intuition's telling you something. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, probably a little more than you wanted, the energy vampire theory.
No, look, I appreciate it. Actually, I can relate. I had someone I'd been mates with for some years, and they'd been very helpful to me in a bit of a tricky phase of my life. And I felt somehow indebted to that person. And, you know, it was then their turn to go through a tricky aspect of life. And I for sure was there for them 100%. And then it happened again, and I was there again. And then it happened again, and I was there again. And I realized after a while, and look, you know, not my first rodeo, for sure, you know, I'd heard many times about, you know, how you sometimes have people in your life that can become toxic. And as you say, you know, just sort of suck the life out of you. And it's not something that I did. It wasn't easy for me. I'm a deeply loyal person. But it got to the point where I just had to cut them loose, and it was a conscious decision, and it felt bad in the moment. And we kind of faded away. I let us fade away. It wasn't, there was a big conversation around it. But what I won't forget is that for weeks and weeks after that, as that distance grew and that I didn't have that constant drain of my energy in my life, it felt liberating. I still, even now, I remember it, I feel it now, almost viscerally, how free I felt. And it only then became obvious to me how much of a drain that person had become on my energy and my positivity. And it was interesting because loads of other people around me had said, I don't know how you continue to have that person in your life. You know, they're not someone they'd want in their life. And I just kind of went with it. But anyway, so I would say for anyone who's listening to this, who has an inkling that someone might be an energy vampire, I'd certainly encourage them to have a really good think about that. And ultimately, you know, make the decision to do something about it. And it doesn't have to be a big drama. It can just be, you stop calling them, you stop messaging them, you just drift away.
And kind of as a corollary, I've always tried to, and if I have to anybody, I apologize, I've tried to avoid being an energy vampire. Yeah, I've always almost wanted to say, I actually want to be in the situation where somebody says, well, what can I do for you? Not because, you know, I want them to owe me, but it's, I don't want to be in the situation where it's like, oh God, I got to ask Matt for a favor again. And, you know, he's already up 3-1. Not that anybody's keeping score, but I think it's, we all like to think on the one hand that we're special, but on the other hand, we're not special. And you know, we all have our needs and we all have the things that we want. But we also have to recognize, you know, I may be saying, well, Matt, you can do this for me. It's not a big deal. I don't know what else is going on in your life and what other things are going on. This may be that stressor, whether it's a good stress or a bad stress, that pushes you over the line for becoming ill or causes something else to work. So it's a checks and balances. It's a give. There is no easy answer, but I think as you said just a moment ago, you know, you had a good think about it. And a lot of these things, it's too easy, especially if you watch sitcoms on television, which I don't watch a whole bunch anymore, or you look on social media, you know, it's so easy to make a thing, well, you just make a snap decision. Well, things are not always a snap decision. Sometimes you have to ruminate on it and, you know, seek guidance. And sometimes you make the wrong decision, but I suspect, you know, this is again, mentors and relying on people. I mentioned the gentleman who was a very good mentor who told my doctoral professor, send Ben for a run. I've learned so much from him, from doing things with him professionally, because at times when I'm likely to flash out or send that angry email, he's the one who sends the email, says, hey, I'm aware of this. I'm working on it. You know, I'll get back to you in a couple of days. And whenever you get that email, I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but whenever you get that person, hey, I need your decision now, that's probably telling you the message that you need. So I think the big thing that I've learned is slow down, think, and usually you'll make the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. Ben, I'm conscious of time. We're probably going to wrap it up here. If there's any last point you'd like to bring to the table around the subject of making movement a lifestyle, I'd certainly love to share it with the world.
I think the thing people need to recognize is, or two things people recognize is, first of all, if you get to the end of the year or the end of the 6-month period or whatever, and you've scheduled movement into your life, which I firmly encourage everybody to do, and you've achieved that movement 75 to 80% of the time, you've been successful. Because that's a really good. So if you said to yourself, I'm going to take a walk 5 days a week for 25 minutes, and you get a year in and you did that 75 to 80% of the time, that's successful. I think the second thing to remember is be cognizant that movement is a lifestyle, or is part of your lifestyle, and it's going to have ebbs and flows. There's going to be periods of time where maybe if you enjoy moving, you're going to move more. You mentioned your ultra triathlon career. I suspect, just from chatting with you a little bit, the things that you have going on, if I said, hey, Matt, let's train for an Ironman next year, you'd kind of look at me and go, probably right now isn't the right time, simply because I know you've got a lot of things going on professionally. So recognize there are certain periods of time that you're more or able to move more or less, and also recognize the ebbs and flows. You mentioned the middle of the day where you're really enjoying that class. You know, people need to look at their schedules. If you're somebody who has young kids, your time to move may be very early in the morning before the rest of your family is up. My training partner for ultra triathlons when I was in grad school was a psych professor at Auburn University. Psych professor had 5 kids, 4 of them in school. Our training time was 5 o'clock, 5:15 in the morning to 7. He's like, I got to be back, feed the kids breakfast and do that. It worked for him. Now he's retired and he can do more things. So I think it's going to be flexible of when you move, and recognize that based on where you are in your life may influence how much you're able to move.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you very much, Ben. It's been a pleasure. I can say as always now, because it's more than once, an absolute pleasure. I look forward to chatting again in the future. And to everyone else, thanks very much for listening. And if you've enjoyed this, please go ahead and leave us a review on whichever platform you're using. It really does help more than you know. And if you're interested in grabbing a copy of my book, which talks about how you can unleash your potential at work and in life, I'd love to send one to you. If you go to book.theimpactproject.io and take a trip down that path, it'll be on your doorstep in no time. My thanks to Ben again, and until next time, be brave, have fun, and make yourself busy unleashing your potential on the world.